Hello, I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us a guest we have not had on for a while, and people have started pinging me the last few weeks to get him back on. He wrote the book called Leverage in 2011, which was kind of prophetic. It talked about how the cheap money was destroying the world. Hush, Sam. Sound familiar? I'm talking about the man who also now owns market-ticker.org, Karl Denninger. Karl Denninger, thank you for coming to us from Florida.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I want to start with some of the biggest stories and kind of work our way down. There's so many. I know you keep your investor also. You do your own investing. You're a big, you sold a company years back, a big technology company. You're a smart guy. You write a lot. You're prolific in your writing on your market-ticker.org. And I just want to come up with this, which I thought was kind of a frightening headline. And it's John Boehner, and he's on the front page of USA Today earlier this week saying, hey, airstrikes are not going to be enough. So somebody's boots on the ground are going to go into Iraq and Syria, and it looks like that is getting lit up once again. What say you?
I don't know why anyone would think that's prophetic or even anything that's unexpected. Air power has never won a war, and it never will. Because you can bomb people until you think you bombed them back to the Stone Age. They just go hide. You destroy their infrastructure, then they come back out. The only way you ever take territory is to go take territory. Big deal, right? I mean, this is not prophecy or anything like that. It's just basic logic. So the real problem is that we, as a nation, have looked the other way while a number of countries and entities in that part of the world have armed and trained terrorists. And I will include among that list Saudi Arabia, which in the classified sections of the 9/11 report, there is some pretty damning evidence about them being directly involved through their consulates and other official channels in what ended up being the murder of 3,000 Americans on our soil. That is not yet in the public. It still isn't in the public more than 10 years later. There have been enough people talking about it, though, that it no longer is in the realm of tinfoil speculation. We can state that it's reasonably certain that this is, in fact, what happened. But these are our so-called best friends. And at the root of the problem is that you have a group of extremists, a significant part of the Muslim religion, that are really a political force, and they enforce what they want through violence. People that live and die by violence only understand one language, and that is violence. So, what are you going to do here? I mean, at the end of the day, the right thing for us to have done 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and today is to say, you know what, you guys want to shoot each other, go right ahead. The minute you hit one of our people or come onto our soil, we're going to kill you all. And you have to mean it. The problem is that meaning it means we have to be willing to commit ourselves to that. And there isn't any evidence that we do mean it. So we get into these so-called reducing their capability things like what we're doing now with airstrikes. And, all that does is drive them underground for a while, and then they pop up in another place because nobody's willing to take it on.
Well, what about Obama? Recent news coming out this week that he missed almost 60% of his intelligence briefings. He wants to throw the intelligence community under the bus and say, oh, hey, you didn't tell me. The Iraqis, I know I've been reporting since, January, February, that they've been begging for bombing out in the desert before these guys, took Mosul and took all these cities out in western Iraq and all this oil infrastructure in eastern Syria. What gives? I mean, it almost is like we clearly armed them, at least some of them, ISIS, clearly. And I was even saying back in, February that, I guess it's not nice to bomb people you armed. But why do you think we let this get out of control? Why do you think the president let this get out? I mean, somebody should be fired over this. I mean, all of a sudden, this is the biggest threat to humanity, and nobody knew about this?
Well, everybody knew about it, Greg. What do you do, though? I mean, this is the central problem. It goes back to prior to 9/11. It goes back to when the coal was blown up, and President Clinton, and even before then. You have a group of people who simply don't have the kind of view of political debate, if you will, that we have in this country and in most of the free world. It is a very different view. It's a medieval view. It is a view that goes back to what you used to see in 1100, AD. All right. And so what are you going to do there? I mean, they understand one language, and it's gunfire. So are you going to say, well, gee, we didn't get the briefings? Look, there's lots of reasons to throw Clapper under the bus. All right, the surveillance state that the NSA has built here on American soil is one of them, but this isn't one of them. This is the most obvious outcome that you could have possibly imagined. Hello, Benghazi. What do you think Benghazi was really about? Do you really think that these guys went after a CIA detachment just because they kind of sort of felt like it? Now, come on. We don't have the whole story there, but my guess is we were funneling arms to those people. We tried to cut them off and get the guns back, and they said, oh, you can have them back all right, hot, dirty, and empty.
Well, how's this going to affect the economy? I want to move back up here to the Ukraine in a minute, which is all this stuff is economy affecting. How's this new burgeoning war? I mean, some people think, war is good for the economy. And I say, wow, as long as you don't get blown up.
Well, yeah, and the thing is it's bad for the economy because war in the general sense, what does war do? War takes production out of the economy, diverts it to blowing things up, which sounds great except for one thing. It raises people's stress levels, it depresses confidence, and most importantly, in today's world, it damages international trade. And remember, this is always the argument that you hear from the internationalists and the globalists, right? If I trade with you, you're less likely to shoot at me. Well, there's another side to that, which is that if I trade with you and I build my economy based on trading with you, and then we start shooting at each other, that trade gets disrupted and goes away. What does that do to my economy?
Well, look at Russia. I mean, now there's reports out this week. They're cutting gas supplies. I've been predicting this. That, when they started this whole thing, I said, hey, what are they going to do for natural gas? I mean, they cut gas supplies to Europe by 15%. The transit pipelines for Ukraine have been dramatically cut. Also, I mean, it's this is looking ugly. The Russians are looking for capital controls and confiscation. In the country and money leaving out of the country. I mean, this is looking ugly to Europe. And meanwhile, Mario Draghi will do whatever it takes. The head of the ECB will do whatever it takes, and if that means to break the treaty, it's okay. We'll just print money. I mean, what? I mean, this is This is looking bad. This is looking like a precursor to a bigger war. What say you?
It might be. There is an argument to be made that the Federal Reserve was created as a means of financing World War I. And it's actually an argument that's backed up by some historical fact and statements of people who were involved in getting that legislation passed in the first place, because essentially the creation of the Federal Reserve came with the creation of new money that essentially was used to finance World War I. So there is monetary policy a means of financing conflict? Of course, guns and bombs and all of this, they cost money. You've got to pay for them somehow. There's only two ways. One, you can either tax people explicitly, which of course they don't like very much. And the second one is you can tax them behind their backs and hope they don't figure it out and bust you for it. But the distortions it puts into your economy in the long term are enormous. Just look at all the trouble that we've had since then in the devaluation of our currency. There's no free lunch anywhere to be found. But this situation with Russia, whatever we thought and the Europeans thought they could possibly gain by tampering with the Ukrainian political process, and we did, and they did, when you knew that Russia had their only 12-month deep water naval port in Crimea, is utterly ridiculous. Whoever was doing that and didn't stand up and say, excuse me, gentlemen, the Russians are never going to give this up unless you bomb them back to the Stone Age, which of course means nuclear war. How did that happen? How did we come all the way down that road without looking at this picture and saying, you know what, strategically, this is an impossible goal. You guys are, you're poking a bear that eventually is going to wake up and bite. It's not because he wants to bite. It's because you've backed him into a corner and you can't expect them to give this up. It's not going to happen.
Well, you wrote your book in 2011, Leverage, and that is prophetic. Talking about borrowing from the future, all this money, all this borrowing, all this debt, and what's happening now, and it will kill the economy. Basically, I'm paraphrasing. Then we have consumer confidence numbers come out, and they're not good. Housing numbers came out, they're not good. The PMI numbers came out, they're dipping. And, meanwhile, you have the Fed saying, look at the great GDP number, it's 4.6%. And I'm thinking, what? I mean, I just had Greg Manarino on. He said, you can't have any exploding economy if you have a labor participation rate that's at 30-year lows or whatever. And then you also have this money velocity that's twink, nothing. I mean, what do you think? What do you think is happening to the economy? Are we getting ready to take off like the Fed says, or are we getting ready to crash?
Well, how do you take off? Where is the consumption base that forms the 60% of our economic output? We have a small percentage of the population that's done extremely well with this so-called reflation. However, we have everybody else who's done very poorly. And then you have all of the things that have been larded up on their backs. Obamacare, the depression of employment within the United States by offshoring, the H-1B visa issues, the evisceration of the middle class, and then to add on top of that, the insane ramp in educational costs that make the pursuit of a college degree an unprofitable enterprise for anybody that's not into a STEM field. So if you're not into science, technology, engineering, mathematics, going and getting a college degree today is actually a money-losing proposition. Then, as if that's not bad enough, the government's answer to this is, well, go to work for a nonprofit for 10 years and we'll forgive the debt. So what are you doing now? You're going to incentivize people to go get PhDs in women's studies. What does that contribute to the economy? But after 10 years, the taxpayers get to pay for it. And oh, by the way, you may think that that's free to you when it gets written off, but it's not, because the IRS treats that as income. So you're going to get a tax bill for about a third of that in the year in which it's written off. Nobody has gotten those bills yet, but they will. And the IRS doesn't take no for an answer when it comes to paying them.
Well, let's talk about Obamacare, and that's one of the things that you really hit on, several months ago, and that you said that the economy couldn't survive Obamacare. And they put off a lot of stuff until 2015, the big one, the employer manual, all the employer mandate. Your prediction about people say that nothing's bad's going to happen up until the election. Okay, I don't know if you agree with that or not. But other people say after the election, look out. In 2015, look out. What do you say? What's your prediction for the economy and up to the election and after the election in 2015?
Well, some of the regional Fed districts have already run surveys on hiring profiles and what people are expecting, because they are, unlike the main CPI numbers and the BLS's employment report, these guys are kind of interested in the underlying story behind their regional Fed surveys. And so they want to know what the forward impact is likely to be of these policies. And so they've asked this question. And what they found is that there is already a trimming of employment expectations coming from the employer mandate. This was expected. Nobody thought this wouldn't happen. What I haven't seen yet, and what's going to be the really critical factor, is what this does to hours worked. All right, that's in the big employment report that's comes out every month. We look at that number, and it's one of the things I track very carefully, because tenths of an hour change in the work week are equivalent to millions of jobs. People don't understand how this works. It's a simple ratio. If you take a tenth of an hour off of everyone's work week, and their pay per hour stays the same, the amount of money they make goes down. So, you say, well, that's only, $6 or, $2 or whatever per person. Yeah, multiplied by 200 million people. Okay. So, I look at this and say, there's a problem here. And we saw some drawdown when this was first put in, and over the last few months has stabilized. The question is going to be, coming in 2015, whether or not we see that take another leg in the downward direction, because that has a huge impact in the negative sense on actual earnings and disposable income.
And what do you think? Go ahead.
I think it's coming, and
downturn.
The surveys,
a downturn in hours
downturn is
work.
coming. I think the surveys say it's coming. I think the reality is it's coming. The financial impact so far of Obamacare has been relatively muted because of all the exemptions. Now, those had not been put in, which, by the way, are illegal according to the legislation itself. But, the president's not stupid. He's a political animal, and he realizes that the last thing he wants is for these things to hit before a re-election bid, right? So, and of course it's not his, but it's Congress. He doesn't want to see Congress go hard right. And so, the worst of this impact will come after the elections in November. But I think coming into 2015, you're going to see a major deterioration in the employment indexes, and that's bad news for the economy as a whole.
Ooh, that's one sobering prediction. 2015 is going to suck for employment. That's what you say.
Well, if you're an average worker, yeah, I don't know what it's going to mean for the the equity indices, and as an investor, one of the things that I've found very amusing is the fact that you are increasing systemic leverage dramatically through buybacks and borrowing at allegedly very cheap rates, right? In order to keep the stock prices levitated. And that works just fine right up until the point that it ends. But at some point it must, because if I borrow $1 million at 10% interest, I have to pay $100,000 a year in interest. If the interest rate then goes to 2%, I can either pay $20,000 in interest, or I can borrow another $4 million. Okay? So what has happened over the years, and this has been a 30-year trend, which is one of the reasons you don't see investment managers talking about it, because most of them have never lived in a different world. Neither have most investors. But when that ends, the benign case is that you can't borrow any more money because rates flatline. The malignant case is that rates go up and you have to make a principal pay down in order to be able to afford the same amount of interest coupon. You don't have the money to make the principal pay down. Let's say that rates were to go to 4%. Okay, so now I can't have $5 million out anymore. I have to pay off enough that my coupon is still $100,000. Well, where am I going to get the capital from?
You're talking about an implosion. When do you think this comes?
Well, it's very difficult to determine, but mathematics say that which can't go on forever won't. I expected that the market would have priced in this sort of a change by now, but I'm actually on the contrarian side when it comes to government bond rates. Everyone says they're going up a lot. You have to realize there's another side to this, which is if the economy sucks severely enough, they will go down instead. We could see a 2% 10-year treasury rate for the next 10 to 15 years. And of course, the problem with that is that you don't get a 2% treasury rate for the next 10 to 15 years with a robust economy and good hiring. What you get it with is a 1930s style depression.
You think we're headed for a 1930s style depression?
I think there's a very decent probability of it, yes. And the longer that the Fed stays involved in their manipulation of market rates, the more likely it becomes. But you only need to look at what's happened in Japan. They tried to machine their way out of a regular cyclical problem that they had generated with their own trade policies, and it blew up in their face and resulted in 20 years worth of stagnation. I don't see where people like Bernanke or Yellen, for that matter, can get around mathematics. It's never worked. You're never going to make 2 + 2 = something other than 4.
Pretty sobering, my friend. Do you think this happens in the next couple of years, in the next year? Do you think the economy could fall out of bed? You're talking about a deflationary depression is what you're talking about coming.
Well, in real terms, yes. The problem with the Federal Reserve and fiat currency is that you can, in nominal terms, prevent the deflation.
Oh, print tons of money.
Okay.
So you think they'll print tons of money?
Yeah, the problem with doing it is that you destroy the pension funds and the other fixed income sources that are dependent on this. That's why QE ended. It had nothing to do with the economy. It had to do with duration matching in bond portfolios and the fact that those people in fixed income just simply couldn't tolerate any more of the depression of their total return. Everybody likes to talk about Bill Gross being a lion of finance, right? And he's now moved from PIMCO. He's leaving there, and that's all wonderful. What they forget is that all Bill Gross did was take advantage of a 30-year secular trend. He's no genius. He just happened to have a big cudgel, and being one of the largest asset managers in the world in the government bond market, he could swing his weight around. Well, what happens when he goes to Janus and all of a sudden he's a little fish in a big pond, and there's a lot of sharks. So, and then on top of that, you have the end of this 30-year trend. Can the guy continue to produce the sort of results he's produced when he had everything in his favor into an environment that is much less favorable? We'll see. If so, then he's a genius. If not, he was just somebody that was riding a big wave.
Karl Denninger, market-ticker.org. We'll put up your link to your book, Leverage, which was out a couple of years ago. Good read. We'll also put up a link to your site. Karl Denninger, thanks for coming on and giving us your analysis and perspective on the economy and the geopolitical situation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.